The night was cold, and the sky above the alien city burned red with firelight. At the center of the stone courtyard stood a tall pillar, blackened with the marks of age and blood. Chains rattled as a young alien woman was dragged forward by guards, her arms bruised and her legs weak. The people shouted, throwing stones at her, each strike leaving cuts on her skin, yet she did not cry, she did not beg, she walked with her head held high. The elders of the city called her cursed, they said she had brought famine and storms. They said only her death could please the beast that came once every year, and so she was condemned, stoned, and chained to the pillar. As drums echoed through the night, the crowd gathered, their faces glowing in the fire, their eyes filled with fear. They wanted her gone, not because she was guilty, but because they were afraid. The young woman's name was Soraya, though no one dared to speak it now. Her long hair was tangled with dirt, her skin marked with purple bruises. She leaned against the cold stone, her arms stretched above her head, bound in heavy iron. She closed her eyes, but her lips whispered silent words, not of fear, but of defiance. If fate has chosen me to die, she thought, then I will die without breaking. A stone struck her cheek, blood ran down slowly, but she did not flinch. The guards laughed, one of them pushing her head back against the pillar. You will be gone before dawn, he sneered, and the beast will feed on your bones. The crowd roared in approval, but beneath their cries, another sound stirred. Far beyond the courtyard walls, hidden in the shadows, a stranger watched. He was not of their kind, he was human, a traveler who had wandered into the city seeking shelter. He had not expected to find such cruelty. From the alley, his eyes locked on the chained woman, and something in him burned with anger. The drums grew louder, echoing against the stone buildings. The priests painted the ground with red ash, marking the signs of sacrifice. Children hid behind their mothers, their small eyes wide with terror. They had all grown up hearing the story of the beast, and tonight, they would watch it claim another victim. Soraya raised her head, her breathing shallow. The firelight danced across her face, showing both her pain and her strength. She did not beg the crowd, she did not call for mercy. Instead, she looked at the stars, her chains pulling tight with every breath. The night wind carried the smell of smoke and fear. The human stranger clenched his fists. He wanted to rush forward, to stop this madness, but he knew the crowd would turn on him instantly. He was one man against 100. Still, as he watched her silent defiance, he felt he could not walk away. The air grew heavy as the ground trembled slightly. The beast was close, its roar echoing faintly from the mountains. The people cheered, lifting their hands in fear and excitement. Soraya's eyes opened, calm but unyielding, and in that moment, her gaze fell upon the stranger in the shadows. She did not speak, she could not, but her eyes told a story of pain, of injustice, of hope. The human's breath caught in his chest. In her silence, he heard a plea louder than any scream, a plea that would change his life forever. The drums stopped, the crowd went silent. All that could be heard was the rattle of chains and the distant growl of the beast. The sacrifice had begun, and fate was waiting to see if anyone dared to defy it.
The fire pits burned brighter as the night deepened, smoke curled into the sky, and the crowd pressed closer around the sacrificial pillar. Every face was filled with a strange mix of fear and hunger. They feared the beast, but they hungered to see blood spilled. It was the way of their people, a ritual that had lasted for centuries. The ground trembled faintly again, like the beating of a giant heart. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers under their breath. The elders raised their staffs, chanting words in an ancient tongue. Their voices rose and fell like waves, calling for the beast to come, and every chant made Soraya's chains rattle against the stone. The young woman's body ached, her wrists raw from the iron, her skin burned from the cuts left by the stones. Yet still, she stood tall against the pillar, refusing to collapse. Her eyes, though heavy with pain, glowed faintly in the firelight. She looked like a fallen queen, broken yet unbowed. Some in the crowd murmured uneasily. "She does not cry," one whispered. "She does not beg," another said, and for a moment doubt flickered among them, but the priest silenced it with a sharp cry. "The cursed must not speak." The human stranger still watched from the edge of the shadows. His heart pounded as the tremors in the ground grew stronger. He had heard stories of alien beasts in his travels, but never had he witnessed such a ritual. Never had he seen a woman condemned not for her crimes, but for their fear. His fist tightened as he saw another stone strike her shoulder. Her body jerked, but her head stayed high. A thin trail of blood ran down her arm, glistening in the firelight. The crowd cheered as if it were victory, but to him, It looked like cruelty dressed as tradition. Then, a low growl rolled across the valley. The sound made even the bravest guard pale. Children began to cry. And women pressed their faces into their cloaks. The beast was awake, and it was coming. Every heart in the courtyard froze with terror. The priests raised their staffs higher, their chants quickened. They painted the stone ground with thick red lines. The blood of animals spilled into bowls. The scent of it spread through the air, sharp and heavy. It was meant to draw the beast, to guide it to the sacrifice. Saraya closed her eyes, listening to the cries and chants. She had lived her whole life in this city. She had seen others chained before her, heard their screams echo in the night. Now it was her turn, but she promised herself one thing. She would not scream. No matter what came out of the darkness, the human could not look away. His chest rose and fell with deep, angry breaths. Every instinct told him to act, to do something. But he was only one man, armed with nothing but his will. The entire city stood against him, and yet, leaving her to die felt like a greater death. The growl came again, louder now. The stone beneath their feet vibrated as if struck by thunder. A massive shadow passed across the fires. The beast was close, its form hidden, but its presence heavy and suffocating. Even the guards stepped back, fear breaking through their pride. The crowd fell silent, every whisper cut short. The only sound was the crackle of fire and the rattling of chains. Saraya lifted her head and stared into the night with calm eyes. And in that calm, she seemed braver than the hundreds around her. The human's jaw tightened as her gaze found his again. It was as if she was telling him, "If no one else stands, then you must." His pulse raced, sweat rolled down his neck. He had not planned to be a hero, not tonight. But fate was already pulling him toward a choice. The beast roared, a sound so loud it shook the very bones of the city. The crowd fell to their knees, reaming and covering their heads. But the chained woman did not bow, she did not kneel, and the human, hidden in the shadows, knew in that mo. All eyes turned to the darkness at the edge of the valley. The only sound was the crackle of fire and the rattling of chains. Saraya lifted her head and stared into the night with calm eyes, and in that calm, she seemed braver than the hundreds around her. The human's jaw tightened as her gaze found his again. It was as if she was telling him, "If no one else stands, then you must." His pulse raced, sweat rolled down his neck. He had not planned to be a hero, not tonight, but fate was already pulling him toward a choice. The beast roared, a sound so loud it shook the very bones of the city. The crowd fell to their knees, screaming and covering their heads. But the chained woman did not bow, she did not kneel, and the human, hidden in the shadows, knew in that moment her courage demanded his defiance. The sacrifice had not yet begun, but destiny was already changing, and the night would not end as the people expected. The city gates had closed long before the beast's roar shook the valley, but one man had slipped inside before nightfall, a traveler draped in a worn cloak. His boots carried dust from distant worlds, his eyes sharp and restless. He was human. A rare sight here, where humans were whispered of as myths, and his arrival could not have been timed more dangerously. He had come seeking only shelter and food, nothing more. But what he found was a city preparing for blood. The smell of burning pitch hung heavy in the air. Torches lined the streets, guiding crowds toward the central courtyard. Every corner echoed with the same chant. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. The human, whose name was Kael, followed the voices. His stomach turned as he pushed past the gathering masses. And then he saw her, chained to the blackened pillar, her face streaked with blood, her body trembling but proud. For a moment, Kael forgot to breathe. He had fought wars, seen prison. And soldiers alike suffer, but this was different. This was no battle. This was cruelty, a woman condemned not for her deeds but for the fears of others. He studied the faces in the crowd, twisted with fear and excitement, and he realized the whole city had agreed to her death. The guards stood proudly, their spears glinting in the firelight. The priests painted sigils in red ash, their voices rising in dark prayer. Children clutched their mothers, half hiding, half peeking, and at the center of it all, she stood in silence, Saraya, the sacrifice, a figure of broken strength. Kael's hand brushed the hilt of his knife, hidden beneath his cloak. But what could a single blade do against so many? He cursed under his breath, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed to step forward, to break her chains, but reason whispered that it was impossible. Then her eyes lifted, meeting his through the crowd. For a heartbeat, the chaos of the night faded, the chants, the drums, even the growls of the beast seemed distant. In her gaze he saw not despair but defiance, and in that defiance he felt a spark inside himself ignite. A stone flew from the crowd, striking her ribs. She gasped softly, her knees buckling. Kael's jaw tightened, his heart hammering. He gripped the knife harder, his knuckles white. He had promised himself he would not interfere in alien matters, but now, watching her suffer, he knew that promise was broken. The ground shook again, this time more violent. Dust fell from the rooftops as the beast's roar rolled closer. The crowd screamed, some in fear, others in worship. The priests raised their voices louder, drowning out the cries, and the guards tightened their hold on their spears. Kale pushed forward through the people, his cloak brushing against frightened children and angry men. He stopped only a few paces from the pillar, close enough to see the air central. On biting into Soraya's wrists, close enough to hear the rattle of her chains with every breath. She stared at him again, her lips parting slightly, but no words came. Her chains spoke for her.
Kale leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't deserve this," he whispered, her eyes softened, just for a second, before hardening again. A guard shoved him back roughly, sneering, "Outsider, stay away. Do you wish to join her?" The crowd laughed, jeering at the strange man, but Kale did not retreat. He stood his ground, his voice calm but steady. "Why is she condemned?" The guard spat. "She carries the curse. The beast demands her." Kale's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "Or maybe you demand it," he muttered under his breath. The guard raised his spear, but the roar of the beast silenced even him. The earth split slightly at the edge of the courtyard, flames bursting upward. The people screamed and fell to their knees. The priests cried out, "It comes! It comes!" Soraya's chains rattled violently as her body stiffened. Kale's heart pounded as he looked from her to the darkness beyond. He knew in that moment, if he did nothing, she would die. The beast was near, its shadow already moving against the firelight. The city trembled, and the crowd wailed. Kale's hand slipped beneath his cloak, gripping the knife again. His breath came heavy, his decision clear. Tonight, he would not be a traveler. He would be a defier of fate. And as the chains rattled louder, and the beast roared again, Kale stepped closer to the pillar, ready to act. The story of the sacrifice was about to change forever. The fire crackled high into the dark sky. Smoke wrapped the courtyard in a heavy blanket. The people stood pressed together, whispering prayers, but their whispers were drowned by the deep growl that echoed from the mountains. The beast was coming closer with every heartbeat. Kale stood near the pillar, his cloak brushing the stone. His hand gripped the hilt of his knife, hidden but ready. The guard who shoved him earlier still glared. The priests kept painting more blood across the ground, but Kale's eyes never left the chained woman. Soraya's face was pale in the firelight, her lips trembled, but no sound came. Her wrists were swollen and red, iron biting into her flesh. Her body was bruised and weak, but her spirit had not broken. She lifted her eyes to his once more. It was not a cry for help, it was not even a plea for life. Her eyes told him something else. Something deeper. She was saying, "I will not beg, but you see the truth." Her silence was louder than the chants around them. Kale's breath grew heavier. In all his travels, he had seen people look away from suffering. He had done the same many times, walking past what he could not change, but this time, he felt her silence cut through him like a blade. Her eyes seemed to say, "If no one stands, then the chains will never break." A stone suddenly flew from the crowd. It struck Soraya on the side of her head. Her knees buckled, blood dripping down her temple. Kale lunged forward. Without thinking, he caught her shoulder before she collapsed fully against the pillar. The crowd jeered at him. "Let her fall. She is cursed," someone shouted. Another voice added, "Leave her, outsider, the beast must feed." The guards pointed their spears at Kale, but he did not move away, his hands steadying her. Soraya's lips parted slightly. For the first time, a whisper escaped her. It was so soft only Kale could hear. "Why, do you care?" Her words were broken, but they carried weight. Kale's jaw tightened as he leaned close. "Because this is not justice," he whispered back. Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to read his soul. Then her head fell weakly back against the stone, but even then, her eyes stayed open, locked on his. The guards shoved him hard, pushing him away from her. He stumbled but did not fall. The crowd hissed and spat. One of the priests said his staff, pointing at Kale, "Step back, human. You risk your own death." But Kale's voice carried steady through the air. "Tell me, what crime has she committed? What has she done?"
The priest snarled, "She was born cursed. The beast claims her blood." Kale's voice grew colder, his eyes sharp. "Or perhaps you fear her strength and so you call it a curse." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No outsider had ever spoken against the ritual. The guards closed in, their spears raised. Kale's heart pounded, but he stood firm. He knew one wrong move could end him here. Then the ground shook violently. A deep roar thundered across the valley. The fires flickered, and the air filled with the stench of sulfur. The people screamed, falling to their knees. The beast had entered the city's edge. Soraya's chains rattled violently as the stone beneath her shook. Kale's eyes locked on hers again. In her silence, he saw no fear, only a question. Would he walk away like the rest, or would he defy fate and stand beside her? The priests raised their staffs higher, chanting louder. The guards steadied their spears with shaking hands. The crowd wailed and begged the gods to accept the offering, but Kale could no longer hear them. All he heard was the silent plea of the chained woman. Her bloodied lips moved without sound. Her gaze burned into him, asking for no mercy, only for truth, only for action. And Kale, his chest heavy with resolve, knew that he could not let the night end the way they demanded. The beast roared again, closer now. Every torch shook in the blast of its cry, and Kale stepped forward, closer to the pillar. He had made his choice. The chains would not hold her forever. The courtyard trembled under the beast's roar. Every stone in the city seemed to shiver. The crowd dropped to their knees, their voices rising in frantic prayers. The priests screamed louder, waving their staffs toward the sky, but Kale did not kneel. His eyes were fixed only on Soraya. She swayed weakly against the pillar, her chains rattling with every movement. Her breath was hollow, her skin pale under the firelight, yet her eyes still burned with that same defiance. Kale felt his chest tighten, his blood pounding in his ears. Something inside him broke. He could not watch her suffer any longer. A guard stepped forward, spear in hand. He jabbed the weapon toward Kale's chest, snarling, "Back away, human, or you will feed the beast with her." The crowd cheered at the threat, eager for more blood, but Kale's hand shot up, grabbing the spear just below the blade. In one sharp motion, he wrenched it free and shoved the guard back. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. An outsider had just defied their sacred right. The priests shouted, their voices shrill with fury. "Blasphemy! He dares interfere with the sacrifice!" Kale ignored them, his eyes locked on the chains. The iron was thick, forged to hold a victim until death. He gritted his teeth and swung the spear like a hammer. The metal rang as it struck the chain, sparks flying in the firelight. The crowd screamed, some in rage, others in fear. Another guard lunged at him, blade raised high. Kale twisted, his cloak snapping behind him. With the stolen spear, he struck the man in the chest, sending him sprawling. The people gasped louder now. This was no longer ritual, this was rebellion. Soraya's lips parted as she stared at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You will die with me." Kale shook his head, his jaw tight. "No," he growled, "not tonight." He raised the spear again, slamming it against the iron. The chains groaned but held. Sweat ran down his forehead as he struck again. Each impact echoed like thunder in the courtyard, until at last, one of the links cracked with a sharp metallic cry. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted for the guards to kill him, others screamed that the beast would destroy them all. The priests fell to the ground, clawing at the dirt, but Kale kept striking, his rage giving him strength. The beast's roar grew closer, shaking the very sky. The torches flickered wildly, their flames bending in the blast of hot wind.
The ground split near the edge of the courtyard. A massive claw gripped the stone as the beast pulled itself into view. Its eyes burned like molten fire. Its teeth glistened with hunger. The people wailed and scattered, pressing against the walls. Some fled through the alleys, desperate to escape. But Kale did not move. He swung again, his voice raw with fury, until the final shackle shattered. Soraya stumbled forward, her legs too weak to hold her. She collapsed into Kale's arms, her chains clattering to the ground. For the first time in centuries, a sacrifice had been freed. Gasps of disbelief spread through the crowd, and all eyes turned from the broken pillar to the man who had defied fate. Kale steadied her, his arm wrapped firmly around her shoulders. She blinked up at him, her lips trembling. "You broke them," she whispered, her voice filled with shock. Kale met her gaze, his own steady and fierce. "And I'll break anything else that tries to take you." The beast roared again, shaking the city walls. Its shadow fell across them, towering and monstrous. The crowd screamed and fell to the ground in terror, but Kale stood tall, Soraya in his arms. His voice rang clear against the chaos. "No more chains," he declared. The pillar stood empty behind him, the iron lay shattered at its base. The ritual was broken, the curse defied, and the night had reached its breaking point. The broken chains fell heavy against the stone floor, their sound echoed through the courtyard like thunder. For a moment, the crowd went silent, every eye fixed on the human who had done the impossible. Kale held Soraya upright, her weak body pressed against his chest. The pillar stood bare for the first time in centuries. Generations had watched victims chained to it, none had ever been freed, none had ever defied the beast, and now, one man had shattered both the iron and their fear. The priests fell to their knees, their faces pale with rage and terror. "This cannot be," one of them cried, "the ritual is broken, the beast will destroy us all." The guards raised their weapons, torn between duty and fear. Some stepped forward, others trembled and stepped back. The people murmured, voices rising like a storm of confusion. Saraya clung weakly to Kale, her wrists bled where the chains had cut her skin, but her eyes, though tired, glowed with something new, hope, a light she had thought lost forever. She whispered faintly, "You freed me. No one ever dared." Kale looked down at her, his voice low but firm. "Then remember this moment, because your life is not theirs to take." He turned to face the crowd, his chest rising with defiance. "You call this justice? You call this sacrifice?" he shouted, "but I see only fear disguised as faith." Gasps rippled through the crowd, some shouted for his death, others stayed silent. Mothers pulled their children closer, men clenched their fists but did not move, and behind them all, the beast's roar shook the night again. The creature emerged fully from the shadows, its body covered in dark scales, its horns sharp and twisted, eyes burning red like molten fire. Each step cracked the ground beneath its claws. Its breath came in bursts of smoke and sulfur. The crowd screamed, scattering toward the walls. Some fell to their knees, begging the beast for mercy. Others pressed against doors, desperate to flee. The priests cried louder, waving their staffs, "Take her, beast. Take the cursed one." But the pillar was empty, and the woman was no longer bound. Saraya straightened, though her body shook. Her voice was faint but carried strength. "No more," she whispered, "I will not die chained." Kale steadied her as the beast's shadow fell over them, its massive head lowered, eyes burning into theirs. Hot wind from its nostril ILS blasted their faces. Kale gripped the broken chain still clutched in his hand. It was heavy, but it was now a weapon. The guards froze, none daring to step forward. The priests fell silent, staring in disbelief. Every eye watched the human standing against the beast, and in that silence, Kale spoke again, "Then let it take me, if it dares." The beast roared, shaking the very heavens, its claws ripped through the stone as it struck the ground. The shockwave knocked people off their feet, but Kale held firm, pulling Saraya close behind him. The broken chain glimmered in the firelight as he raised it high. Saraya's eyes widened, her breath catching. She whispered, "You should have run, you should have left me." Kale's jaw tightened, his voice steady and fierce. "I don't run from monsters," he said, "I fight them." The beast lunged forward, its teeth flashing like blades. The crowd screamed as the ground split beneath its weight, and in that instant, the city knew. The sacrifice had ended, but a battle far greater had just begun. The courtyard shook as the beast's massive body climbed into the open. Stone cracked beneath its claws, and firelight glimmered on its black scales. Its horns curved like blades, its wings spread wide enough to shadow the city walls. Every eye turned to the monster, and every voice in the crowd broke into screams. The people had prayed for its hunger to be fed, but now they begged only to live. The priests fell on their knees, their staffs clattering to the ground, their chants turned into cries for mercy. "Great beast, take your sacrifice," they shouted, pointing toward the pillar. But the pillar stood empty, the chains shattered at its base. The creature's burning gaze followed their trembling hands, and then shifted. It saw Saraya, weak but standing free, held up by the stranger beside her. A growl rolled from its throat, shaking the very air. Hot wind burst from its nostrils, blowing dust and sparks into the crowd. The guards dropped their spears, too terrified to move. Even the bravest warriors said back against the walls. Kale tightened his grip on Saraya, his other hand clutching the length of broken chain, now a weapon in his grasp. The beast lowered its head, its molten eyes locking on them. Saraya whispered faintly, her voice shaking, It knows I was meant for it." Kale's jaw clenched as he stepped forward. "Then it will have to face me first," he said. The crowd gasped at his defiance. No one had ever stood against the beast, not with words, not with weapons, and yet here was a human, refusing to bow. The beast roared, a deafening sound that shook the torches from their stands. Flames bent backward, the ground cracked deeper, its giant wings snapped once, sending a gale that knocked dozens to the ground. Saraya nearly fell, but Kale pulled her back against him, his body a shield between her and the monster. The creature lunged, its claw sweeping like a blade of stone. Kale leapt aside, dragging Soraya with him. The pillar shattered into pieces under the strike. Stone rained across the courtyard, scattering the priests like insects. The sacred ground of sacrifice was destroyed in one blow. The people wailed, "The end has come. The gods are angry." But Kale only growled under his breath, "No, this is not the end, it's the beginning." He wrapped the chain tighter around his arm. The broken iron links glinted in the firelight like jagged teeth. Soraya leaned weakly against the wall, her voice faint, "You can't fight it, Kale. It's death itself." Kale glanced back at her, his eyes steady. "Everything dies," he said, "even monsters." And then he turned back to face the beast. The creature opened its jaws, flames burning deep within its throat. The heat rolled across the courtyard, scorching the air. People screamed and pressed against each other, desperate to flee, but Kale ran straight toward the danger, his voice a roar of defiance. "For every chain you've claimed, beast, tonight you break." The beast unleashed fire, a torrent of molten light. Kale dove to the side, rolling across the stone.